Welcome back to The Breakfast here on Plus TV Africa. It's time for Today in History, and I'm going back to the year 1953. I'm going to be sharing with you a short story about a man called Jomo Kenyatta, the father of current Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. He was born in 1987 and, of course, died in 1978. He was a Kenyan anti-colonial activist and politician who governed Kenya as its prime minister from 1963 to 1964, and then as its first president from 64 till his death in 1978. Of course, I mentioned the father to the fourth Kenyan president, Uhuru Kenyatta. And I'm sharing today about the day he was arrested for leading the Mau Mau uprising from 1952 to 1960. It's also known as the Mau Mau Rebellion, and it was a war with the British Kenyan colony from 1920 to 1963 between what was called the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, KLFA, and, of course, the British authorities. The KLFA, of course, in that war and in that revolution had failed to capture widespread public support. And, of course, unfortunately, they kind of lost the war. But all of that led to Kenya being granted independence a year later after the war ended. One of the reasons that it is rumored that they lost the war was because of a certain British policy that, and I'm going to mention this because it's very, very similar to what happened here in Nigeria. The divide and rule policy was what the British used back then in the 60s to weaken the support that the Mau Mau rebellion had, and that's how they eventually lost the war. The number of deaths attributed to the emergency or to the period was between 25,000, some people say as much as 50,000 deaths in the Mau Mau rebellion. Of course, Jomo Kenyatta remained in prison after he was arrested until 1959, and then he was exiled to Lodwar in 1961. When he was released, he became president of the KNU, which was their political party then, and then led the party to victory in 1963, oversaw the transition, of course, as prime minister, oversaw the transition of the Kenyan colony into an independent republic, which he then became president of in 1964. And so he was arrested in 1953, exiled in 1959, or rather released in 1959, and then, of course, became prime minister after his release and after he came back to the country in 1963, and then president after Kenya's independence in 1964. So he has played a very, very, very major role in Kenyan history, from being a freedom fighter into seeing Kenya's independence and, of course, freedom from the British colonization, and, of course, then also becoming president until 1978. The Kenyatta family has, over time produced two presidents. The current president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, took over in 2013 and is still president of Kenya. But today we're talking Jomo Kenyatta.
Yes, Jomo Kenyatta. Interesting story. Just a few similarities between him and Mandela with regards to the fact that he went to prison and then became president. That was just that. Yeah, sadly that the Mau Mau uprising, I really don't know how they made that connection, but we know how vocal he was against the British colony, against British rule. And there was even a quote that he made, very popular quote. He said, when the missionaries arrived, the Africans had the land, missionaries had the Bible. They taught us how to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened them, they had our land and we had the Bible. That's Jomo Kenyatta for you. So he was just against, colonialism. He wanted, self-determination for, the Kenyan nation. Eventually got it, eventually became president, and sadly passed away.
And it's, not the first time that, we're hearing of a tactic called divide and rule and divide and conquer. Which has been apparently, is the British policy and is their, regular tactic if they need to, win a battle or divide a people, or to win, over a people, divide you with religion, with, tribe and with politics and the likes. And, people have also said that's about the same thing that was done here in Nigeria. that weakened the unity that should have given Nigeria, more bite, give us, a fighting force. But unfortunately, it didn't work. So it's not the first time the British have used that same policy. It worked in Kenya also. But the positives from that is after the Mau Mau Rebellion and Revolution, they eventually achieved independence in 1964, 1963 or 64. All right.
All right, so the next story for today in history would be about someone that we can't forget in a hurry in history. She's popularly known as the Iron Lady, and we're talking about Margaret Thatcher. It was this day in history, April 8th, 2013, that Margaret Thatcher, Britain's first female prime minister, passed away. She had stroke on April 8th, 2013. She passed away, and more than 2,000 guests from around the world attended her funeral, which occurred in London's St. Paul's Cathedral. She served as Prime Minister of Britain from 1979 to 1990, and Thatcher was the longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century. She was nicknamed the Iron Lady. She was, credited by her admirers with championing free market, conservative policies that revitalized the British economy. In 1959, Thatcher was elected to the House of Commons, and she rose through her party ranks. And when the Conservatives came into power, under Edward Heath in 1970, she was named Secretary for Education. She was the first woman to serve as opposition leader in the House of Commons. She left the House of Commons in 1992, and her reign basically generated lots of criticism from some conservative politicians. And interesting things about Margaret Thatcher is that she used to be a scientist, even though she said she already had it in mind that long term she was going to go into politics, but she really was a scientist, and she was developing, ice cream recipes. But she said she became bored staying in the laboratories for a long time, that she wanted to, meet the people. She wanted to be with the people, for longer. And that's how she got into politics and became the longest, serving prime minister. And when she passed on in the year 2013, her ashes was actually buried at the Royal Hospital in Chelsea. They were laid next to the rest of those of her husband, when she passed away at the age of 87. Margaret Thatcher reminds me of Thatcher. You know the Thatcher I'm talking about?
No, she doesn't remind me
what I'm trying
of
to say
Thatcher.
is Thatcher's fierce personality, really.
Still no.
That's why she took the name. What do you think?
Oh no, they even spell totally different. No, Aneta, don't do
it's
this,
the pronunciation
please.
I'm talking about.
Come on, please.
You can definitely modify spellings as you like.
Oh Lord, have mercy.
But that Margaret Thatcher died today, the 8th of April, 2013.
Okay, all right. It once again reinforces the conversation on women in politics, women in governance. Female prime ministers. Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, currently is doing phenomenally, and it's been far back in history that we've always had to see women do exceptionally well in those positions. And I would always say ignore some of the bad examples, because when you mention women in politics, there's always people who would wake you from sleep and say, oh, what of this one who stole, or what of this one who was corrupt?
As though the men were saints.
Exactly. So, it's great that we continue to have these women, examples, these female examples. The world needs to continue to find ways to create, that space. And at the same time, women themselves need to, find ways to get into that space. No one is just going to give it to you.
Yes, I'm talking about change for the next presidential elections in Nigeria. I'm yet to see like a powerful female voice coming out that you would kind of guess that maybe this person might run in 2023. I'm yet to see that, but maybe it's too soon to judge.
Well, I think it's being honest with ourselves that it doesn't seem like we're there yet as a country. We haven't been able to develop our political space and our electoral system well enough to be able to give every single person a fair chance, especially women, with regards, the way that Nigerians even act towards women in politics and women in governance. So we're not there yet. And so a lot of people, well, females who might consider it, would always be discouraged, really, by facing the reality of where we are politically and with our electoral system.
But really, when are we going to be there yet?
I really don't know.
If there are women who feel they can definitely definitely create the change that we need in Nigeria. And they have the
How many women vote?
political support.
Even.
My point is, let them just try. You know, you can't just say, when is the right time?
Nothing wrong with trying, and it's not really about, you know, when is the right time? Great, but
I mean, look at Tanzania. I'm very sure she never imagined to ever become president, maybe.
Yeah, I'm really talking, you know, about facing the reality of where we are today, and also developing the mindset of Nigerians with regards, you know, the electoral process. How can we have a better electoral process that assures every single person that you know, runs for election that they will get a standing and a fair chance as long as they campaign properly? How many women actually get to vote to the polling station? How many women really are registered to vote? How many of these women also, you know, were bold enough to say, yes, we will go out there and contest? How expensive really is, you know, the electoral process? How many people can afford, you know, campaigning in Nigeria and running for, you know, elective position in Nigeria? I completely support it, you know, but at the same time, let's also remember that it is also great that we, you know, get women to also, or everybody to start at the, you know, smallest level. Just try with local government offices. Even if that oneself is still politicized to a level where a lot of people believe that those things aren't really done by elections. They are given by whoever is governor. House of Assembly, State House of Assembly,
seems like appointments
and all of that.
Exactly.
The State House of Assembly, the, you know, councillorship, the local government chairman, permanent secretaries, the House of Representatives. You know, those levels can also be filled up by women. A lot of decision making, you know, takes place in those levels. It doesn't have to be in Aso Rock all the time.
And that's why you need women in the high positions, because it's only when you have women who are thinking of women that would be able to make the parts of politics that involves appointments. It's women that would be able to sit and think, let's get more women who are qualified into these positions. So whether it's from the grassroots, whether it's from the big leagues, we just need women in politics in Nigeria.
Oh, so it's a whole conversation on its own. But that's all we have for you today in history. I went back to 1953 and told you about Jomo Kenyatta, one of the founding fathers of what we have today as Kenya.
Yes, and I told you about Margaret Thatcher, who passed away this day in history, 2013, shining the lights and blazing the trail for all women to follow.
All right. Stay with us. We're moving into our first major conversation for today. Banditry, kidnapping, and all of the insurgency and insecurity challenges we're having in Nigeria. The conversation about who is sponsoring these persons and these insurgents. Who is sponsoring these kidnappers and these bandits? The Nigerian government claims to know, and of course has threatened or made mention of revealing some of these names. But are we genuine and are we serious about this conversation? We'll talk about it next with former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Obadiah May Lafia, coming up next.